Welcome to section 8.6. This is the last section in chapter 8 for us. We're going to be solving equations of rational functions, so solving fractional equations. This comes back a little bit to our geometry. We're going to be doing the common denominators from 8.5. We're going to be working with factoring in 8.4. We're going to be working on solving equations from chapter 1. I mean, we're going to kind of go across the board here. What I'm going to suggest to you when you start, though, is that you always, if you see a plus or a minus, is that you put parentheses around the plus and minus so that we make sure that when we cross multiply, we distribute correctly. So in order to solve a proportion, which you did in geometry, we're going to cross multiply. So I'm going to take 3 times the 3x plus 8, and you see that that's important to have the parentheses so we can distribute it through. And then we're going to set that equal to the 6 times the x plus 2. And these have to stay equal to each other. So we're going to distribute this, and we're going to say, all right, 9x plus 24 equals 6x plus 12. And now we're back to chapter 1, and you can solve this any way you would like. I'm going to move the 6x over, and since I'm moving the 6 to the left, I'm going to move the 24 to the right. Now, you could take this in 2 steps if you want. I'm just going to take it in 1, because what I find then is 9 minus 6 is 3x equals 12 minus 24 is negative 12. So I divide by 3, and x equals negative 4. Now the problem is, because we have fractions, we cannot have 0 in the denominator of a fraction. We're going to actually have to go back and check. And so what I'm going to do real quick is just check to make sure my answers work. And I'm going to plug the negative 4 into each side. So 3 divided by negative 4 plus 2 equals 6 divided by 3 times negative 4 plus 8. And all I want to make sure is 2 things. 1, I don't get 0 in the denominator. And 2, that I actually end up with the same fraction on either side. So I'm going to do that. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. So I have 3 over negative 2 equals negative 12 plus 8 is negative 4. Well, can 6 over negative 4 divide or reduce to 3 over negative 2? Sure. 3 over negative 2, 3 over negative 2, absolutely. So I'm going to circle my x equals negative 4. Now, you don't have to show this check work. If you just want to plug things in your calculator and show that they work, that's fine too. Let's take a look. Let's try number 2. Again, if I see a plus or a minus, I'm going to put parentheses, because when I cross multiply, I'm taking negative 6 times x minus 1 equals negative 12 times x plus 2. And I distribute negative 6x plus 6 equals negative 12x minus 24. Okay, now the negative 12 is the bigger. I'm going to move that because I want my x to be positive. So if I move my 12x to the left, then this 6 has to be subtracted to the right. So 6x equals negative 24, negative 6 is negative 30. When we divide by 6, x equals negative 5. Now, before I do anything, I just want to make sure I'm checking. So let's plug it in. Negative 6 over negative 5 plus 2 equals negative 12 over negative 5 minus 1. Well, this is negative 6 over negative 3. This is negative 12 over negative 6. This 6 over 3 gets me 2. Negative 12 over 6 gets me 2. The answer is yes, so I circle my answer. Okay, now we just want to make sure that you're going through and checking them each time. You can use your calculators, though, if you need. Now, this is the easiest. When you have one fraction equals one fraction. The problems happen when you have to add the addition or subtraction of fractions, because now we got to go back to 8.5. Now, 8.5 says when I look at 8 over x plus 11 over 3, I need a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this first fraction by x over x for this denominator, and this fraction by 3 over 3 to get the other denominator. If I do that, on top I get 24 plus 11x, all divided by this denominator of 3x. Now I see a plus or minus. So now I have one fraction equals one fraction. Now what I can do is cross multiply. So I have x times 24 plus 11x equals negative 14, and I'm just going to put this in parentheses, times 3x. I distribute this, 24x plus 11x squared equals negative 42x. Whenever you see an x squared and an x, you have to get it equal to 0, so we're going to add 42x. What I end up getting is 11x squared plus 66x equals 0. All right, now, as I look at this, now what I'm going to try and do, you can put this in quadratic formula if you want, but I don't have a c value. I have an a and I have an a and I have a b, but I don't have a c. Or what I'm going to do is say, do they have anything in common? Well, yeah, I can take an 11 and an x out of each. What I'm left with then is an x plus 6 equals 0. Okay, this is just factoring it. If I set each piece equal to 0, 11x equals 0, so when I divide by 11, x equals 0. And if I set this equal to 0, and I subtract 6, x equals negative 6. Now in this case, we have 2 to verify if they work. Now I'm just going to go back to my original equation again. If I put a 0 in, I get an undefined fraction. This is an extraneous solution because you can't divide by 0. To save us some time, what I'll tell you is this ends up working. Now you don't have to tell me it's extraneous, but the biggest thing, again, you can't divide by 0. So keep that in mind, okay? And that's why the x equals 0 is an extraneous solution. All right, so here we go. I'm going to make a common denominator. This one's a little bit more difficult, but we're going to go through, and let's make a common denominator. This denominator is a 4, so I'm going to multiply this by 4 over 4. This denominator is an x, so I'm going to multiply my first fraction by x over x. And I'm going to say plus a negative 3. Okay, so I have 11x minus 12 all over 4x equals 5 over 2x. Now I'm going to put parentheses around my stuff here a second because I'm going to cross multiply. Alright, so here we go. 11x minus 12 times that by 2x equals 5 times 4x. The 2x gets distributed, so 22x squared minus 24x equals 20x. And we said whenever there's an x squared and an x, you need to equal it to 0. So I have 22x squared minus 44x equals 0. All right, I have only an a and a b, so I'm going to do the same thing. What can come out of each of these? Well, if I take a 22 and an x out, I'm left with an x minus 2 equals 0. This tells me that 22x equals 0. So when I divide by 22, x equals 0. But look back, you have a denominator of just an x. This is extraneous. I also have an x minus 2 equals 0. That makes x equal to 2. And again, to save us some time, yes, this does end up working. And so you'll notice these two with the addition and subtraction really are the same thing. You make the common denominator on the one side, and then you cross multiply again. All right, we're going to flip to the back side, get a little bit more difficult as we go through. All right, we give you 2 ways to solve these, and what I'm going to do is kind of show you one way on one and another way on the other. So I'm going to kind of give you these options. As you look at the first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what we call using the LCD. Okay, and we talked about this least common denominator. It's this idea that you basically just look at what the common denominator would be and you multiply it to every option. Okay, so take a look. I have two denominators. In this case, my LCD is the two denominators. I have an x and an x plus 2. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply everything that I have, and I have three terms, a 1, this fraction, and the second fraction, by this x times x plus 2. Here's how it works. So I take the 1 times x and an x plus 2, plus I take this 4 over an x plus 2, and I'm going to multiply it by an x and an x plus 2. And I'm going to take this 9 over x and multiply by an x and an x plus 2. And if you multiply every term by its denominator, let me show you what happens. This second fraction, the x plus 2's, you'll have one in the numerator or the denominator. They'll cancel. The third term, you have an x on top and bottom, and so the x's cancel. And so if I start distributing x times an x plus 2, you get x squared plus 2x, plus, I only have a 4 and an x left, so 4x, equals, this 9 now gets distributed, so 9x plus 18. And by doing the multiplying by the common denominator, what you have done basically is eliminated all of the fractions. In my opinion, this is the easier method. So take a look. If I set, because I have an x squared and an x, I set this equal to 0, I'm going to move the 9x and the 18. So I have x squared. Now 2x plus 4x is 6x, minus 9x is minus 3x, and a negative 18. If I factor this, I get a negative 6 and 3. So I have x minus 6 and x plus 3 equals 0. So I have that x equals 6 as a solution and x equals negative 3. And the truth is, in this case, they both work. Okay? And so that's the first method of solving. And again, it's in my opinion, it's the easier way. So kind of keep in mind that as we're going through. The second one, I'm going to show you option number 2 for that same question. And what I'm going to do in the second side, I'm going to make this, I'm going to give you, you know what, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to make this one extra credit for the quiz. Extra credit for a quiz. If you can put this on a separate sheet of paper, okay, this is due quiz day. Because this one's quite a bit more challenging. Now you have an option. You can do option number 1 where you use the LCD, or you can use option number 2 where we make a common denominator. It's kind of up to you, but this will be extra credit for the quiz. It'll be worth 2 points. So plus 2 points of extra credit on the quiz. Okay, but it has to be on a separate sheet of paper or you do not get the extra credit. Okay, so let's do it option number 2 way. This is the fraction 1 over 1. If I need a common denominator, then I'm going to multiply this first fraction by an x plus 2 over an x plus 2. And I don't really need to multiply the second fraction by 1 over 1, but you could. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I have x plus 2 over x plus 2 plus 4 over x plus 2 equals 9 over x. And if I add my numerators, now that I only have one denominator, I get x plus 6 over x plus 2 equals 9 over x. I see the plus and minus, now I can cross multiply. So if I cross multiply, I get x times x plus 6 equals 9 times x plus 2. X squared plus 6x equals 9x plus 18. And guess what? This is exactly what we have above, where if I set it equal to 0, I get x squared minus 3x minus 18 equals 0. And again, you can factor this to x minus 6 and an x plus 3. So x equals 6 and x equals -3. Now again, the method, the answer that you get is the same. It's the method of choice. So example 1, we multiplied everything by the LCD, and method number 2, we used a common denominator. And again, it's completely your choice in this. You get the option. But again, if you want extra credit on the quiz, here it is. These two are the same question. You just put this question on a separate sheet of paper and show me your work. I'll give you some extra credit. So that's the end of 8.6. Again, you have a worksheet for homework. Please start that so I can kind of help you with that in class. But if you have questions or concerns, we'll do warm-ups and stuff in class as well.